So, ano ba muna ang fundamental analysis? No? Fundamental analysis, keep it very simple. Fundamental analysis is basically a study of all relevant factors that might affect the currency. No? So, ano ba yung mga pwedeng makaapekto sa currency? No? Pwede bang makaapekto dyan yung balita? Ano ba yung polisiya ng gobyerno nila? Pwede ba makaapekto dyan yung trade balance? No? Ibig sabihin, yung pera na pumapasok or lumalabas sa isang bansa. So, yun yung fundamental analysis, no? All relevant factors, no, that would actually cause the currency to move, no? So, madalas, yung talagang nagpapagalaw nito is what we call macroeconomic indicators, no? Kasi, kumbaga, yung premise ng ating fundamental analysis is tinitingnan po natin kung anong nangyayari sa isang bansa, no? And if something good is happening to one country, then most of the time pwedeng tumaas yung value ng pera nila, no? Sabihin natin sa US, no? Kunwari may magandang nangyari sa kanila, lumakas yung GDP nila, which is their local growth. Kung ganon, pwedeng tumaas yung value ng pera nila, no? Pero pag sabihin natin pangit yung economy nila, pwede naman bumagsak, no? Or it could be related to the supply and demand of their currency, no? Kunwari kapag maraming supply ng pera sa currency nila, pwedeng bumaba yung value. Kapag konti lang supply ng currency nila, tumaas yung demand, pwedeng umakyat yung value. So later we'll actually talk about some specific scenarios on how that happens. So yun yung fundamental analysis, no? You're looking at those relevant factors that might affect the economy. And one of the advantages of doing fundamental analysis is you get to pinpoint kung ano ba yung mga currencies na pwede nyo i-trade, no? Hindi kayo nanghuhula. Kasi before po, I was a pure technical trader, no? Wala namang masama doon. Marami nung pure tech na kumikita, I know I have a lot of friends who earn from pure technical analysis and they're happy with that, no? Okay yun. Wala namang problema doon. Pero para sa akin, as an additional benefit, fundamental analysis lets me pinpoint on a few currencies, no? So hindi na ako kumbaga random na naghahanap sa charts kung anong pwedeng i-trade. Meron na akong specific na gusto kong silipin lang. So, kunwari, di ba, CAD, malakas last week. So, kumbaga, buong linggo, naghahanap lang ako ng trade sa pwedeng ipare sa CAD. No? So, you can trade Euro CAD, you can trade USD CAD, you can trade GBP CAD. No? So, kumbaga na, kumukonti yung selection mo because of that. So, it saves you a lot of time. And, syempre, kapag agree sa'yo yung fundamental analysis mo, you have more confluence, no, na tama yung ginagawa mong trade. Okay. So, yun yung, that's the idea behind that. All right. So, ngayon po, ang gusto natin sana, kumbaga, tignan sa market, no, is that there's two scenarios that we want to check out in the market. Kasi kung isa-isayin natin mamaya isa-isayin natin yung mga macroeconomic indicators na mention kanina, no. Pero generally, we want to see kung ano yung sentiment ng market, no. Ano ba yung pakiramdam ng market based on what's happening doon sa fundamentals para diretso apply tayo kagad, no. So, yung dalawa po yung scenarios na yan, no? So ito yung two scenarios. You actually have your risk on market and risk off market, no? So yung risk on market, anong ibig sabihin yan? Ang risk on market gives you a scenario wherein yung mga investors, yung mga traders, they are kumbaga they're very optimistic towards riskier assets. So kumbaga nakikita nila that the economic conditions are very favorable, no, for riskier investments. At ano ba yung normal na riskier investments? The riskier investments would be yung ating stocks, no. Normally those are riskier investments, no, for the equities market. Kung sa forex naman ang pinag-uusapan, commodity currencies yung tinitrade natin pag ganon, and that's your Canadian dollar, that's your Australian dollar, and New Zealand dollar. Okay. So yun yung risk on market. Medyo favorable yung conditions for growth, no? Medyo maganda yung doon papunta yung economy. Now, a risk of market on the other hand is an economic situation wherein it's not favorable na kumbaga pumunta doon sa mga risky assets kasi talagang baka bumagsak yung market, no? So hindi ganun ka-favorable yung conditions for those assets to increase. So instead, ang nangyari, the investors would opt to look for safer havens, no? So ayan, no, kumbaga isipin nyo parang meron kang sentiment meter. Kung Kung very optimistic yung mga investors, yung mga traders, then normally that's a risk on market. Kapag medyo takot, medyo uncertainty yung nakikita natin sa market, then it turns into risk off. No? Let me give some relevant examples. Kung mapapansin nyo po, nung simula nung pandemic, no, kumbaga ang daming uncertainty, hindi natin alam kung anong mangyayari, nagla-lockdown. What do you think would happen? No, would that be a risk on market or risk of market? No, if you were an investor, no, tapos nakikita mo nagpapandemya, hindi mo alam kung aakyat ba or hindi yung stock market, no, probably what you would feel is that medyo nakakatakot mag-invest ngayon. So, magre-risk off yung market. Okay? So, hindi lang ikaw yung nakakaisip nun, halos lahat. So, in a risk off market, you normally go to safer havens. Mamaya explain ko kung ano yung mga safe havens na yan. Now, let's say, ngayon, medyo nagre-reopen na ulit yung mga economies. No? Kunwari, natatapos na yung mga lockdowns, nagkakaroon ka na ng mga travel bubble, nagkakaroon ka ng maraming ayuda, maraming suporta coming from the government as well as the central bank. So kung maisip natin yan, wait, medyo favorable yung conditions ngayon for growth. Kasi talagang pinupush ng gobyerno at saka nung central bank na kumbaga bumalik yung employment eh. Magkaroon ulit ng trabaho yung mga tao. So that would be a risk on scenario. No? So kumbaga feeling ko maraming aakyat ngayon. So I put my money in riskier assets. No? Kunwari, lagay ako sa stocks, lagay ako sa commodity currencies. Ilalabas ko na yung pera ko from the safer havens. Kasi maliit yung kita ng safe havens eh. Okay. So, ngayon, you'll have a lot of different scenarios, different economic indicators, economic events that would affect the market. No? Now, what I want you to focus on, especially kapag hindi natin masyadong maintindihan no, kung ano ba yung magiging epekto ng balita na yan, particular event or particular na balita doon sa value ng currency, I'm not saying all of the time, no, pero most of the time, what you can check would be the supply and demand of that currency, no? How would it affect the supply or demand of that currency? Okay? Yun yung iisipin nyo lagi. Pag nakakita kayo ng balita, ano kaya ang posibleng effect nito sa supply or sa demand ng currency? And that might give you a very good answer, no, kung anong possible bias mo. So, let's go back to to basic economics, no. Whenever you have an item that has a lot of demand, tumataas ang value niya. Kapag mababa ang demand, bumababa din yung value niya. On the other side of things, if you're looking at supply, kapag tinataasan mo ang supply ng isang bagay, bumababa yung value niya kasi ang dami, available siya. Pero kapag binabawasan mo naman yung supply, then tumataas yung value ng pera. Okay? So, this works doon sa, kumbaga, this also works for currencies. If you have a lot of demand for that particular currency, then it's going to go up. If there's gonna be no demand for that currency, then pwedeng bumagsak yung value niya. Now, central banks mainly focus not really on demand, but they focus on supply pagdating sa pera. Diyan nila pinapagalaw yung value ng pera. No? So, kung meron silang mga mandate or meron silang mga policies na nilalabas, kumbaga yun yung mga actions taken, uh, that would increase money supply, then most probably pwedeng bumagsak yung value ng pera nila. No? If they take actions that would decrease money supply, then tataas yung value ng pera. No? So mamaya we'll have some very relevant examples with that. Okay. Any questions so far? Ito, may tanong dito. Ibig sabihin po nito, Coach, malalaman po kung anong currency na volatile on that day. Ideally, yes. No? Kasi hindi naman minsan talagang gumagalaw siya on that day, but when you check out the economic calendar, you'll be able to see a list of events kung ano yung pwedeng gumalaw na for the week. Okay. Alright. So, syempre, kapag walang balita, then really don't expect na gagalaw siya. Kumbaga medyo ano lang siya, up and down lang siya. Kaunting galaw lang yan. Alright. Check ko lang sa YouTube. Baka may mga tanong. Alright. So far, wala pa naman. Ay, good evening din, Ma'am Kimberly. Very nice to see you here. Okay, resume na natin. So, ito naman po yung ating mga macroeconomic data na gusto nating bantayan. Earlier I mentioned ano yung mga mabibigat na balita na dapat natin tinitingnan. So ito po yun. When it comes to currencies, these are the ones that you need to look out for. Yung pag-trade ng stocks din naman, pwede rin naman na gamitin natin yung mga economic data na to kasi tinitingnan mo kung favorable yung conditions dun sa stock para umakyat or bumaba eh. So kumbaga titingnan nyo din kung risk on or risk off yung market whenever you're trading stocks. But anyway, for now, let's focus on these economic data. So ito, sabi nga ni Sir Edmar, anong particular na news dapat yung inaabangan? So actually, ito yun. Number one is tignan nyo po kung ano yung galaw ng central banks. No? Tandaan nyo that the government and the central banks are two separate entities. No? The central bank is not actually under the government. Kasi marami siguro na naiisip, no? Kahit ako, whenever I first encountered the central bank, I always thought that the central bank was actually part of the government. Well, it's not. No? It's actually an independent entity. Sila lang yung namamahala ng pera, no? Pero separate entity sila. They're not under the government, so hindi pwede sila sabihan ng gobyerno na, kumbaga, presidente sabihin, mag-print kayo maraming pera. They cannot do that, no? They have a separate entity. Meron silang sariling board of governors at sila yung nag-handle nun. So, lahat ng central banks, ganyan. Okay, so, yung central banks, syempre marami yung tasks, but mainly there are only two things na talagang trabaho niyan. No? Kumbaga, dalawa lang nire-regulate niya ng maayos. Number one is inflation and number two is employment. No? Always remember that. Inflation at employment talaga yung pinufokusan nila. And all their actions, all their mandates and policies are geared towards controlling inflation and maximizing employment. No? Kasi yan talaga ang goal nila. Maisip natin, inflation may be a bad thing. No? Kasi inflation, yun yung kumbaga growth of, hindi growth eh. More on pagtaas ng presyo ng ating mga bilihin, no? Yung mga goods and services natin. First thing na maisip mo, that's bad. I don't want inflation. But to be honest, you need inflation for your economy to grow. But you just want it at safe levels. So sabihin natin, nasa mga 2 to 3%, that's a good inflation target. No? Normally, 2% talaga inflation target nila. Okay? Now, for developed economies like us, normally we experience higher inflation levels. No? Kaya tayo pumapalo minsan ng 5-6%. Nung pumalo yata tayo 8%, nagpanik yung papanik yung mga tao. Yung central bank natin, bilis kumilos. Nagtaas sila ng interest rates kaagad to control that inflation. No? So, yun yung inflation side. On the second part naman, ang tinutulungan nila sa economy is to maximize employment. Kumbaga, sila pro-employment. They're trying to make economic conditions favorable for the companies na mag-hire ng maraming tao. Sorry, wait lang. Inom lang water. Oh. Alright, sorry. So, again, it's inflation and employment. Now, they have several tools at their disposal for them to influence the market para makontrol yung inflation at saka ma-maximize yung employment. No? So maraming tools yan, pero yung mga general tools na gusto kong abangan nyo sana, at ito madalas kasi yung ginagalaw, number one are interest rates. No? Interest rates, ito po yung tinataasan nila or binababa nila yung interest rates ng pag-utang. No? Kasi kapag tinataasan nila yan, no, actually ang interest rates lang na pinupush nila, yung interest rates nila doon sa mga retail banks. Okay? So hindi naman nila hawak yung retail banks. Pero syempre, pag tinaasan nila yung interest rates sila sa retail banks, kailangan itaas din ng retail banks yung interest rate nila. Kapag nagbaba ng interest rate yung central bank, kailangan magbaba din yung retail banks. No? So kumbaga ganun nila nakokontrol yun. Now, yung interest rates na yan, it basically affects your money supply. Kapag nagtaas po kayo ng interest rates, what will happen is that nagmamahal yung pag-utang, di ba? So whenever you're borrowing money, it becomes very expensive. And at the same time, yung savings account nyo, yung returns nun tumataas kasi mas pataas yung rate ng ng mga savings account pag gano'n. So, anong mangyari during that economic condition? Normally, people would not spend money. no? Kasi ang mahal umutang eh. Bakit ako utang ngayon tapos gagastos ako, magtatayo ako ng negosyo, papatayo ako bahay, ang mahal-mahal umutang. Maybe next time, no? Tapos at the same time, nakikita mo mataas yung interest rates ng savings account mo or other investment vehicles, doon mo na ilalagay. No? So, hindi naglalabas ng pera yung tao. And with that, it limits the money supply in the economy. Mas konti yung nagsisirculate na pera. Okay? And with that, nakokontrol yung inflation. Yun naman talaga yung purpose nun eh. Okay? Now, if that happens, normally tumataas yung value ng pera nila. So, kumbaga, as retail traders, we get to ride that kind of movement. No? We actually benefit from that. So, kapag nagtaas ang interest rates, normally tumataas din yung value ng pera. On the other side of things, kapag hirap naman yung economy mo, kagaya nung nangyari sa atin sa pandemic, no? Limited yung galaw ng pera, maraming walang trabaho, GDP is down. So what do? No, you want to steer up the economy. So ang ginawa ng mga central banks natin, lahat sila nagbabaan ng interest rates. Okay? Tayo hindi lang tayo masyadong nagbaba. Okay? Na-control naman natin kaya okay lang. No? Actually, magaling ang central bank natin. So, yung iba talaga nagbagsakan ng interest rates. Si dollar almost zero rate na siya. Euro, zero. No? So, kumbaga, bababa talaga ng mga interest rates. Australia, nagbabayad. No? New Zealand, lahat sila. Now, with that, natulungan nga naman talaga nila yung economy. No? It moved the economy much faster, mas mabilis yung recovery, mas maraming may trabaho. Okay? So, again, pag nagbagsak ng interest rate yan, normally, tumataas ang supply ng pera, bumababa din yung value ng pera. Okay? So whenever they lower interest rates, baka bumaba yung currency na yun. Okay? So yan ang ating interest rates. Secondly, they have another tool which is called quantitative easing. Ano yung quantitative easing? They are forcibly increasing the supply of money in the economy. Ang ginagawa nila, ang tawag dyan is bond buying. No? So kumbaga, it's just a more specific way of quantitative easing. Bond buying program. What they do is that they buy bonds from the retail banks. Tapos, pag bumili sila ng bonds, syempre in return, they give cash doon sa mga retail banks na yun. So, if the retail banks have more cash, then it's gonna be easier for them to lend the money out. Okay? So, mas mabilis yung galaw ng pera kapag yun yung nangyari. So, that's quantitative easing. Now, if you also check, almost all central banks, if not all, nag-quantitative easing during the pandemic. No? Kahit tayo, meron tayong bond buying program. So, ngayon, lahat may bond buying program. If they plan to decrease that in the near future, ibig sabihin nun, pwedeng tumaas yung value ng pera. Kasi nililimit mo na yung supply ulit ng pera sa economy. Alright? So that's quantitative easing. These two things are very important. Now, number 3 is inflation. So we talked about this a little bit earlier. Inflation is just basically the rate of the increase ng ating goods and services. So, we just want a healthy level of inflation. Nasa mga 2%, okay na tayo. No? If you go higher than that, then that's pretty bad kasi syempre nagmamahal yung bilihin. If you go lower than that, kanwari mababa naman yung inflation mo, pangit yun kasi normally mababa din yung growth mo. Okay? So magkadikit talaga ang growth at ang inflation. So our measurement for growth would be GDP. GDP is gross domestic product, and basically it's the total value of all final products. No? So kumbaga, it comprises of a couple of things. Number one, consumer spending. Wait lang, i-mute natin yan. So, okay. Wait lang, isin ko lang. Alright. So, GDP is the measurement of growth, and kumbaga may mga components yan. You have consumer spending, business spending, hindi ko lang nasama pero you have investments there, you have government spending, and then trade balance or balance of trade. So that's the money coming in and out of the market. Majority of that, talagang main factor would be consumer spending. Okay? Yan talaga yung pinakamabigat. Sa mga 70% yata ng GDP yan. Okay? So 2 to 3% would be a great target, pero normally developed economies nasa mga 2% or less. Tayong mga developing economies, mas mataas talaga GDP natin. Okay. Now, next is unemployment, or employment rate. So yan, isa sa mga pinakamabigat din yan. And you normally have the employment rate, the unemployment rate. And if it's around 5%, that's okay. No? Maganda yung takbo ng economy mo. But if you go beyond 5%, 6%, 7%, then that's where it starts to get ugly. Okay? So you want your unemployment rate to be around 5% or less. No? And yun sana yung mga magandang targets. But also, you take a look at kung saan ba nanggaling, no, yung rate. Kunwari, nasa negative 10% yung dating unemployment rate. Pagdating ngayong buwan, nakita mo ano na lang, 8% na lang. So kumbaga maganda naman yung pinanggalingan, no? From 10% naging 8 na lang, kahit above 5% siya, that might still be good for the currency. Okay? Now, the other big news, no, would be non-farm payrolls. I'm sure that a lot of you have seen it. That's every first Friday of the month. So next week, actually, meron tayong non-farm payroll. So medyo mabigat-bigat yun. So tingnan nyo, basically that's the new, kung ilang mga bagong trabaho yung available sa US. No? So new jobs without farming. Yun ang non-farm payroll. Next is trade balance. That's the money coming in and out of the market. Basically, that's your net exports. No? So kapag syempre positive ka sa trade balance, maganda yun. Kapag negative ka sa trade balance, then kumbaga consumer market ka. Okay. Now, I don't want you to go too deep on trade balance kasi medyo tricky pa siya. No? Just focus on the other ones for now. Now, lastly is PMI surveys. Ito importante din to. Yung PMI na yan, ang tawag dyan is Purchasing Managers Index. No? Yung PMI, it's one of the best indicators, no, for ano yung pwedeng mangyari in the future, no? So will there be growth, will there be contraction in the market, no, or expanding ba yan? Kasi po yung mga companies meron yang mga kanya-kanyang purchasing managers, no. So kunwari nagsapatos, no, kunwari si Nike. Siyempre, kailangan tansyahin ni Nike kung gaano karaming raw materials yung kailangan niyang bilhin para ma-produce yung mga sapatos, no? And they don't want to uh, go over the line na sobrang dami nilang binili kasi siyempre malulugi sila noon, no? So tinatansya ngayon ng mga purchasing managers kung anong possible forecast ng sales nila. Tataas ba yung sales nila? And if so, for the next few months, they will probably be very confident na bibili sila ng marami. No? So yun yung lumalabas sa survey. They're expecting expansion in the market. Pero pag natatansya nila na mukhang mahina yung magiging negosyo nila, then they would buy less raw materials. No? So doon pa lang makikita mo na kaagad. No? Yung mga purchasing managers pa, do they want to buy more raw materials? Do they want to buy less? No? Or do they want to buy the same amount? So that could be a precursor of what can happen in weeks, in a couple of months. So yun yung PMI surveys. So dalawa yan. Normally meron kang manufacturing, tapos meron kang services. Ngayon kasi mas malaki na yung services. Dati manufacturing yung mabigat. Pero ngayon kasi mas marami ng businesses that are based on services rather than production. Okay. Alright, so yun po yung ating mga economic data. Any questions so far? Malinaw po ba? Alright, good so far? Okay, resume natin. So, going back to monetary policy, no? Ito po yung one of the important parts that you might want to take note. Kapag sa tingin nila may problem sila with unemployment, no? So, kumbaga, review lang natin yung pag-usapan natin kanina just with a little bit of a better flow chart. Pag may problema ka sa unemployment, normally they would have an easy monetary policy. Ito yung sinasabi natin, binababaan nila yung interest rate, tapos dinadagdagan nila yung bond buying program, no, yung quantitative easing. What that happens is that it puts money into the economy, dinadagdagan mo yung supply, more money equals more spending. So mabilis makarecover. Kapag may problema ka naman sa inflation, then magtataas yan ng interest rates, no, or babawasan nila yung bond buying program or tatanggalin talaga nila. And that's called a tight monetary policy. It fixes the problem of inflation because it takes out money from the economy. So less money equals less spending. So because of that, may nabubuong cycle actually. So let me, go over this step by step. Makikita niyo po dito na let's say may problema ang economy ngayon, mababa ang growth, maraming walang trabaho. No? So we're experiencing a recession. No? So due to a recession, ang gagawin ng mga central banks is that they're gonna lower interest rates. Okay? Kasi tandaan nyo, pag mas mura umutang, no, mas gaganahan yung mga tao umutang at gumastos. No? So because of that, businesses get money, no, for low interest and they expand, resulting into higher employment. So dahil dyan, medyo lumaki na yung negosyo, mas marami ka ng taong hinahire, no? And whenever that happens, no, to the economy as a whole, then nagkakapera na yung tao. No? So money starts to move a little bit faster, and because of that, ang daming bagong mga trabahador, hindi man trabahador, pero ang daming taong may bagong trabaho, no? And it generates more demand, no, for that particular currency. No? So it fuels further demand, and then the economy starts to increase, no, starts to boom. So pag ganon, tuloy-tuloy na lumalakas yung economy, syempre whenever you have growth, you also have inflation catching up. So pag mataas ang growth mo, mataas din ang inflation. Now, that's all right, no, normal yon. But when inflation becomes very visible, tumataas na siya beyond 2%, then the central banks need to step in and control what's happening. So ang gagawin nila is that they now raise interest rates. Noong una, binaba nila. Ngayon, tataas na nila. If they raise interest rates, then mas mahal umutang. No? It's not very conducive for you to spend. And because of that, bumababa yung inflation. Okay? Alright. So, whenever this happens, no, kung nagtaas ka ng interest rates, bumaba nga yung inflation, pero nagmahal naman yung pag-utang, naturally, people spend less again. So, bababa na naman yung spending, no? And whenever people spend less, then businesses won't be expanded, no? And hindi nila ma-afford yung mga loan kasi mataas nga yung interest rates. So, anong nangyari? If that happens, they normally cut out employees. So, binabawasan nila yung mga empleyado. And because of that, tumataas na naman yung unemployment rate mo. Okay? And if it becomes uncontrollable, na talagang halos wala ng trabaho yung mga tao, babalik ka ulit sa recession, yung economy mo. So gagawin na naman ng central banks is that they're gonna lower the interest rates, and the cycle goes on and on and on. Okay? So yan actually yung nangyari, no? And that's actually what you call a business cycle. Ganyan yung paggalaw ng market, hindi yan isang diretso. So it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. Alright. So ang importante is for us to know nasaan ba tayo sa market ngayon, no? Ano ba yung current problems ng economy nila? May problema ba sila sa employment? May problema ba sila sa inflation? From there, makikita mo na kaagad kung ano yung possible galaw ng central banks. No? And you might be able to trade that. Alright? Any questions so far? Okay, pag high inflation, lower currency value, depende po, depende yan. Pero normally, yes, kasi bad yun kapag tumataas yung inflation. Depende pa rin sa underlying economic conditions, pero in general, yes. Kasi kanwari ngayon, talagang pinupush ng Central Bank ng US, yung Federal Reserve, no, na itaas yung inflation. Okay lang sila kahit lumagpas sila ng 2%, no? Kasi gusto nila i-average out 2% inflation. Yung nakaraang, kumbaga nung pandemic, syempre sobrang baba na inflation nila. So gusto nila ngayon, kapag in-average mo 2%, so they're willing to go higher than 2% now. So tingnan natin kung ano magiging effect nun sa US dollar. No? Alright? Okay. So as mentioned earlier, meron tayo ngayong risk on and risk off scenarios. No? So ngayon parang medyo lumalalim tayo isa-isa doon sa mga napag-usapan natin noong una. Ang risk on market again is an economic condition or economic situation na favorable yung mga riskier assets umakyat. No? Yung equities market mo, yung stocks mo pwedeng umakyat. Yung high beta currencies mo, Australia, New Zealand, Canadian dollar. High beta, ibig sabihin kasi nun, yan yung mga commodity currencies natin. So their currencies are actually based on particular commodities. Yung bonds natin, konting sidetrack lang ang bonds mo dalawa yan. Merong bond price at saka merong bond yield. no? Ang bond price, yan yung mismo kung magkano yung bond. Yung bond yield, yan yung magkano yung kikitain mo kapag meron ka ng bond na yon. Okay? Ngayon, kapag risk on ng market, tumataas ang bond yields mo. Kasi walang bumibili ng bonds eh. Kumbaga lumilipat sila kasi maganda naman yung market, favorable yung conditions, why not invest in riskier assets? Okay? So yun ang risk on. At dahil doon, yung yield ng bond, ibig sabihin yung binibigay ng bond, tumataas din. Yung risk off scenario naman, ang nangyari dyan is that you have a lot of uncertainty in the market. Kanwari, nung start ng pandemic or kanwari, nanggigera yung US, meron kang uncertainty, nagre-risk off yung market. And normally, safe havens are strengthened. So, kanwari, US dollar, CHF, Japanese yen, yan po yung mga safe havens. Okay? So, hindi yan masyadong, actually, more on binibili yan no, kapag magulo yung market. And in addition to that, gold is always a staple safe haven. Kapag di alam ng mga tao kung anong pwedeng investan, normally they go to gold. Okay? So, kaya naman lumipad yung gold for the past few months. Okay? And lastly, yung bond price, ito yung tumataas kapag risk off kasi everybody's buying bonds. No? Bonds are the ultimate safe haven. No? So, pag ganyan, tumataas yung bond price. Yung bond yield mo nga, babayan. Okay? So, yan po yung ating risk on and risk off. So, I would suggest you take a look at several economic situations. So, check mo, ano ba nangyayari sa US ngayon? Risk on ba sila or risk off? No? Or you take a look at the whole economy no, as a whole. Risk on ba or risk off? Right? Clear? So, yung risk on and risk off na yan, magamit na kagad natin yan for both FX and stocks. Okay, risk off po ba, coach, ang natural disasters? Most of the time, yes. Since ang pair ni gold si US, both risk off sila, paano po tinitrade si gold? I think that's an excellent question. No? Normally, gold is also traded when US is also uncertain. Kanwari, yung start ng pandemic, wala ka certainty kahit saan eh, di ba? Mataas yung cases all around the world. Gusto mo sana gawing safe haven yung US, ang lakas naman ng tama sa kanila nung pandemic. Saan ka pupunta? Punta ka sa gold. So normally, yun yung nagpapagalaw na. Alright? Is everything clear so far? Okay. So tandaan niyo yan yung risk on and risk off natin. No? So during our live sessions, you can ask kung risk on ba or risk off yung market ngayon, no? Or neutral ba. No? Kasi actually madalas neutral yan, minsan conflicting. So hindi natin mabibigay ng talagang specific na answer all the time. But when the signals are clear, yun, pwede talaga tayo magkaroon ng current risk on or risk off sa market. No? So based doon sa lahat ng napag-aralan natin for the past less than an hour, i-assess nyo ngayon, risk on ba or risk off yung market. No? And if it's risk on, then you already know what to trade. No? Kapag risk off yung market, you also know which one's gonna go up and which one's gonna go down. So you try to trade accordingly. No? So either you're trading stocks, risk on and risk off pa rin. No? Tignan mo pa rin. Kung risk on market, sige, bili ka. Walang problema. No? Pag currencies naman, no? Yung mga commodity currencies madalas yung tinitira natin dyan. Okay? Now, why is euro and pound not there? May sarili kasi sila economy, very well-rounded sila. So, kumbaga, hindi sila masyadong nabibit-bit ng mga ganyang risk on and risk off scenarios.